My son's wife decided I wasn't refined enough to be around my grandchildren and cut off all contact after I refused to change my small-town ways, until the day she discovered I'd been secretly paying their $90,000 a year private school tuition through an anonymous trust fund, and suddenly I was sophisticated enough to babysit whenever she needed a break. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Ruth Mitchell, and at 68 years old, I've learned that sometimes the most painful rejections in life lead to the most unexpected revelations about family, love, and what truly matters. For nearly 50 years, I ran Mitchell's Hardware alongside my late husband Frank in the heart of Cedar Falls, Ohio, a small Midwestern town where everyone knows your name and your business, but also where neighbors show up with casseroles when you're grieving and the whole community rallies when someone's in need. I never imagined that my own flesh and blood would one day view my small-town roots as something shameful, something to hide from polite society like a stain on expensive carpet. But that's exactly what happened when my son James married Victoria Pemberton, a woman whose family tree had more branches in high society than our old oak had leaves, and whose ideas about proper grandparenting would eventually lead to the most heartbreaking and ultimately revealing chapter of my life. The changes in James began subtly after he met Victoria during his MBA program at Columbia. My son, who had grown up helping customers find the right screws and teaching weekend DIY workshops at our hardware store, started using words like provincial and quaint to describe the town that had shaped him. Where he once saw community, he now saw limitations. Where he once found authenticity, he now detected a lack of sophistication. I still remember the first time James brought Victoria home to meet us. She stepped out of their rental car, a sleek, black Mercedes that looked almost comically out of place on our tree-lined street, wearing a cream-colored suit that probably cost more than our monthly mortgage payment. Her perfectly manicured hand hesitated just a moment before shaking mine, as if she was steeling herself for contact with someone who had spent decades handling tools and garden supplies. Frank, bless his heart, tried to make her feel welcome, with his usual warmth. "We hear you're from Connecticut," he said, offering her a glass of his homemade lemonade. Beautiful state. Ruth and I drove through there once on our way to see the fall colors in Vermont. Victoria's smile was practiced, polite, but distant. "Yes, my family has been in Greenwich for several generations. The Pembertons were among the founding families." The way she emphasized her maiden name made it clear that this detail was meant to establish a certain social order, one in which hardware store owners from Ohio occupied a very different tier than Connecticut blue bloods. Throughout that weekend visit, I watched Victoria catalog our life with poorly concealed bewilderment. The handmade quilt on our guest bed, passed down from Frank's grandmother, the mismatched dishes we'd collected over years of estate sales and church bazaars, the front porch where half the neighborhood gathered on summer evenings to share stories and iced tea. To us, these things represented a life well lived, full of love and community. To Victoria, they seemed to represent everything she was helping James leave behind. The wedding, held at the Pemberton family's sprawling estate in Greenwich, felt like stepping into a foreign country where I didn't speak the language or understand the customs. Frank and I, along with a handful of James's childhood friends, found ourselves clustered together like refugees at the edge of a glittering sea of Victoria's social circle. Women in designer gowns discussed vacation homes and charity galas, while men in bespoke suits debated investment strategies and golf handicaps. During the reception, I overheard Victoria's mother, Diane, speaking to a group of her friends. "James is charming," she was saying. "Such a bright future ahead of him. Victoria's father has already made some introductions at the firm. Sometimes these mixed backgrounds can actually be an advantage in business. It makes one seem more relatable to certain clients." Mixed backgrounds. As if James's upbringing was a mild social impediment that could be spun into a marketing asset. I excused myself to the powder room, where I stood for a long moment looking at my reflection, my simple navy dress from JCPenney, my hands still showing the faint calluses from years of honest work, my face lined with what I'd always thought of as laugh lines, but now wondered if others saw as simply provincial weathering. After the wedding, James and Victoria settled in Westchester County, in a house that looked like something from the magazines Victoria always seemed to be reading. Their visits to Cedar Falls became increasingly rare, and when they did come, they stayed at the new Hilton near the interstate rather than in their childhood home. James would meet us for stilted dinners at the one upscale restaurant in town, checking his phone frequently and making excuses about early meetings that required them to cut visits short. Frank's declining health over the following years seemed to reestablish some connection. James came home more frequently during Frank's final months, sometimes even alone. And in those visits, I caught glimpses of the son I'd raised, the one who knew how to fix a leaky faucet and could still recommend the right type of wood stain for any project. But these moments were fleeting, like sunbreaks in an overcast sky. When Frank passed, the funeral brought out the entire town. The church was filled to capacity, with people standing in the back and spilling out onto the steps. Former customers shared stories of Frank's patience and generosity, how he'd extended credit during tough times or quietly repaired things for elderly neighbors without charge. The fire chief spoke about Frank's decades of volunteer service. The high school principal recalled how Frank had mentored countless students through part-time jobs at the store. Victoria attended, of course, maintaining a respectful but distant demeanor throughout. I noticed her texting during the community potluck that followed the service, and overheard her telling someone on the phone that she was at a family obligation in Ohio, as if it were a dental appointment to be endured rather than a celebration of a life well lived. The distance between us grew into a chasm after Frank's death. I suggested perhaps spending some time with my future grandchildren when Victoria announced her first pregnancy, offering to come help when the baby arrived. "That's very kind, Ruth," Victoria had replied. "But we've already arranged for a baby nurse, someone with proper training from a renowned agency. I'm sure you understand." I understood, all right. I understood that my lifetime of experience raising James, helping neighbors with their children, and being a surrogate grandmother to half the kids in Cedar Falls counted for nothing in Victoria's world of certified professionals and proper credentials. When Emma was born, followed by Oliver 2 years later, my role as grandmother was carefully circumscribed by rules that seemed designed to minimize my influence. Visits were scheduled with the precision of diplomatic summits, usually in public places where Victoria could control the interaction. I was discouraged from bringing homemade gifts. "The children have so many things already," Victoria would say, "and we're trying to teach them about mindful consumption." As if a hand-knitted sweater was somehow excessive compared to their closets full of designer baby clothes. The breaking point came during what was supposed to be a joyful occasion, Emma's 5th birthday party. Victoria had rented out an entire children's museum for the event, complete with catered, organic, gluten-free refreshments and a professional party planner. The guest list read like a who's who of Westchester County's elite families with children, arriving in luxury SUVs and nannies hovering discreetly in the background. I had driven 6 hours to attend, bringing with me a wooden dollhouse that Frank had started building before he died, and which I had finally completed. It was a labor of love, with working windows, tiny handcrafted furniture, and even miniature electric lights that Frank had specially ordered. Each room had been decorated with wallpaper samples I'd saved over the years, and I'd sewn tiny curtains from scraps of fabric that held memories, a piece of Emma's baby blanket, material from one of James's old shirts. When I presented it to Emma, her eyes lit up with genuine delight. "Grandma Ruth, it's beautiful. Look, Mommy, the lights really work." She was immediately absorbed, her designer party dress forgotten as she knelt on the floor to explore each perfect miniature room. Victoria's reaction was like a bucket of ice water. "How quaint," she said. the word dripping with condescension. "Emma, darling, be careful. Those old things might have splinters. We'll need to have it checked for lead paint before you can really play with it." She turned to another mother, lowering her voice just enough that I could still hear. "James's mother means well. She's from a small town. They don't always understand modern safety standards." The dollhouse was quietly relegated to a corner, overshadowed by the mountain of presents from other guests, electronic learning tablets, designer dolls, gift cards to exclusive children's boutiques. I overheard Victoria's mother commenting to another grandmother, "It's sweet, really, these homemade things." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Though I do worry about the message it sends, we want Emma to appreciate quality. The drive home that evening was one of the longest of my life. I pulled over twice, not because I was tired, but because tears made it impossible to see the road. The dollhouse had been more than a gift. It had been a bridge between Frank's love and his granddaughter, a tangible piece of our family history. To have it dismissed as potentially hazardous, as something quaint and inferior, felt like having our entire life's work judged and found wanting. The final blow came a week later in a phone call from James. His voice carried the careful modulation of someone delivering a prepared speech. "Mom, Victoria and I have been talking. We're concerned about the children's development and the different influences in their lives. We think it might be best to establish some boundaries." "Boundaries?" I repeated, the word tasting foreign in my mouth. "Victoria feels, we both feel, that consistency is important for the children. They're enrolled at Hillcrest Academy now, and the social circles they're developing. Well, we want to make sure they're getting cohesive messages about expectations and values." The silence stretched between us before he continued. "We think it's best if visits are limited for now. Maybe we can arrange something supervised in a few months, once the children are more settled in their routines." I wish I could say I fought back, demanded explanations, insisted on my rights as a grandmother. But the truth is, I was too stunned to do more than mumble something about understanding and hang up the phone. I sat in my kitchen, the same kitchen where James had done his homework, where Frank had taught him to make pancakes on Sunday mornings, where 3 generations of Mitchells had shared meals and conversations, and felt the full weight of what had just happened. My son, the boy I had raised to value hard work and genuine relationships, had essentially banned me from my grandchildren's lives because I wasn't sophisticated enough, refined enough, or wealthy enough to fit into their carefully curated world. The hardware store wisdom that had guided our family for generations had been deemed incompatible with the rarefied atmosphere of Hillcrest Academy and Westchester County society. That night, I walked through my house like a stranger, seeing it through Victoria's eyes. The worn hardwood floors that I'd always thought of as full of character. The kitchen cabinets Frank had built himself, solid maple that would last another lifetime. The garden where I grew tomatoes and herbs, where James had learned to plant seeds and wait patiently for them to grow. All of it suddenly seemed shabby, insufficient, embarrassing. But as I stood in Frank's old workshop, running my hand over his tools still hanging neatly on their pegboard, something shifted inside me. These tools had built not just furniture and repairs, but a business that had served our community for 50 years. They had provided jobs for local teenagers, supported countless Little League teams and school fundraisers, and kept Main Street alive when big box stores threatened to shut down small businesses across America. Frank and I hadn't just run a hardware store. We had built something real, something lasting. We had raised a son who, despite his current pretensions, knew the value of honest work. We had contributed to our community in ways that couldn't be measured by social registers or bank accounts. And somewhere beneath Victoria's influence and James's misguided attempts to fit into her world, those values still existed. It was in that moment, standing among Frank's tools with tears drying on my cheeks, that I made a decision that would eventually change everything. I would respect their wishes and keep my distance, but I would not let my grandchildren grow up without understanding where they came from. I would find a way to be part of their lives, even if it had to be from the shadows. The next morning, I called Bill Henderson, our family lawyer who had helped us with Frank's estate. "Bill," I said, "I want to set up an education trust for my grandchildren, but it needs to be anonymous. Can you help me do that?" What followed was months of careful planning and paperwork. The sale of the hardware store after Frank's death, combined with our lifetime of careful saving and some wise investments Frank had made over the years, had left me with more money than anyone in Cedar Falls might have guessed. The building, alone, situated on Main Street, had appreciated considerably as the town slowly gentrified. While Victoria's family flaunted their wealth, Frank and I had quietly accumulated ours, living well below our means and finding richness in relationships rather than possessions. The irony wasn't lost on me that the very business Victoria found so embarrassingly provincial would now be funding her children's elite education. Through Bill's legal expertise, we established the Franklin Educational Trust, named after Frank, but vague enough to avoid immediate recognition. The trust would cover Emma and Oliver's full tuition at Hillcrest Academy, along with all associated costs: uniforms, field trips, special programs, even the elaborate fundraising galas that seemed to occur monthly. As the months passed without contact, I found ways to stay informed about my grandchildren's lives. Cedar Falls might have been small, but it had connections everywhere. My neighbor's daughter worked in the admissions office at Hillcrest. The local bank manager's sister was a teacher there. Through careful conversations and gentle inquiries, I pieced together information about Emma and Oliver's progress. Emma, I learned, was excelling in art and showing the same creative spirit Frank had possessed. Oliver, though younger, was already demonstrating a talent for mathematics and an insatiable curiosity about how things worked, traits that had skipped a generation from Frank directly to his grandson. These glimpses into their lives were bittersweet treasures, like looking at stars through a telescope, beautiful but impossibly distant. The hardest moments came during holidays and birthdays, when the absence of my grandchildren felt like a physical ache. Emma's 7th birthday passed without so much as a card from me, though I learned from my network of connections that Victoria had thrown an elaborate garden party with a string quartet and catered tea service. Oliver's 5th birthday featured a magician flown in from Las Vegas and gift bags for the young guests that cost more than many Cedar Falls families spent on actual presents. I began channeling my grandmother's energy into other outlets within the community. The children's reading program at the library became my weekly commitment, where I found myself surrounded by eager young faces that reminded me of Emma and Oliver at every turn. The community garden project that Frank and I had started years ago expanded under my direction, teaching local kids about growing vegetables and the satisfaction of nurturing something from seed to harvest. It was during one of these library sessions that I first heard about the financial troubles at Hillcrest Academy, though not in the way anyone might have expected. Margaret Ellis, the librarian and my longtime friend, mentioned it casually while we were setting up for story hour. "My niece works in the billing department at that fancy private school over in Westchester," she said, arranging picture books on the display table. "Says they've had some interesting developments with their funding. Apparently, they've got a mystery benefactor who's been covering full tuition for several students." My heart skipped, but I kept my expression neutral. "Really? That's quite generous, isn't it? The strange thing is, the trust is specifically designated for certain students only, very selective. The administration has been trying to figure out who's behind it, but the lawyers have everything locked up tight. Professional job, from what I hear." I murmured something non-committal and changed the subject, but inside, a small flame of satisfaction flickered. The anonymous nature of the trust was working exactly as planned. Victoria and James had no idea that the very education they used to justify keeping me away was being funded by the grandmother they deemed insufficient. Months turned into a year, then 2. The ache of missing my grandchildren never lessened, but I learned to live around it, like a tree growing around a fence post. I filled my days with purpose, volunteering at the hospital where Frank had spent his final days, organizing fundraisers for the local food bank, and maintaining the extensive garden that had become something of a showpiece in Cedar Falls. The garden, in particular, became my sanctuary. I expanded it to include an entire section dedicated to butterfly plants, remembering how James had been fascinated by monarchs as a child. Each spring, I would watch the caterpillars transform into butterflies and think about my own grandchildren, wondering if they ever had the chance to witness such everyday miracles in their carefully structured lives. One afternoon in late spring, I was working in the garden when Bill Henderson's assistant called with unusual news. "Mrs. Mitchell, Bill asked me to contact you. There's been an inquiry about the Franklin Educational Trust from Hillcrest Academy's board of directors. They're requesting a meeting with the trustee representatives." My pruning shears froze mid-cut. Did they say why? Apparently, there's some kind of financial situation at the school. They're reaching out to major donors. Bill thinks you should be prepared for increased scrutiny. After hanging up, I sat among my flowers, considering the implications. The trust had been designed to be impenetrable, but desperate people often dig deeper than expected. What would happen if Victoria and James discovered the source of their children's funding? Would it change anything? Or would they simply find a way to accept the money while continuing to exclude me from Emma and Oliver's lives? The answer came sooner than expected, though not in the way I had imagined. 3 weeks. Later, on an ordinary Tuesday morning, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. The voice on the other end was one I hadn't heard in over 2 years, except in my dreams. Ruth? James sounded different, older, tired, and something else I couldn't quite identify. "It's me. We need to talk." I gripped the phone tighter, my free hand unconsciously reaching for Frank's wedding ring, which I now wore on a chain around my neck. "Of course, James. Is everything all right? The children?" "They're fine. Well, they're healthy, but..." He paused, and I could hear him taking a deep breath. "Can you come to New York? There's something we need to discuss in person. It's important." The formality of his tone set off alarm bells. This wasn't a reconciliation call or an olive branch. Something had happened. Something that forced contact despite Victoria's carefully maintained barriers. "When?" I asked simply. "As soon as possible. Tomorrow if you can. I'll send you the address of my office. Victoria doesn't know I'm calling." That last admission hung in the air between us. Whatever this was, it was serious enough. For James to go behind his wife's back, breaking the united front they had maintained for so long. The drive to New York the next day was filled with alternating waves of hope and dread. I had dressed carefully, choosing a navy suit that Frank had always said made me look professional. Not that I was trying to impress anyone, but I wanted to face whatever was coming with dignity. James's office was in a gleaming tower in Manhattan, all glass and steel reaching toward the sky. The lobby alone probably cost more to decorate than Frank and I had spent on our entire house. As I rode the elevator to the 32nd floor, I caught glimpses of myself in the mirrored walls. A woman approaching 70, silver-haired but straight-backed, looking slightly out of place in this temple of commerce. James's assistant, a polished young woman who introduced herself as Melissa, led me to a conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. "Mr. Mitchell will be with you shortly," she said, offering coffee, which I declined. My hands were already shaking slightly. Caffeine wouldn't help. When James entered 10 minutes later, the change in him was shocking. The confident, dismissive son who had delivered the news of my banishment was gone. In his place stood a man who looked haggard, his expensive suit hanging loosely on a frame that had clearly lost weight. But it was his eyes that struck me most. They held a mixture of shame, fear, and something that looked almost like desperation. "Mom," he said, and the word carried more emotion than I'd heard from him in years. "Thank you for coming." He sat across from me at the conference table, his hands clasped tightly together. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then, with visible effort, he began. "There's no easy way to say this. Victoria and we're in trouble. Financial trouble. Serious trouble." He looked down at his hands. The kind that could cost us everything. I waited, maintaining my composure though my heart was racing. Whatever I had expected, it wasn't this. 3 years ago, Victoria's father convinced me to invest heavily in a real estate development project. It was supposed to be a sure thing. Luxury, condos in Miami, pre-sold to foreign investors. We put everything into it. Leveraged the house, maxed out lines of credit, even borrowed against my retirement accounts. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so reminiscent of Frank when he was worried that it made my chest tight. The project collapsed. The developer fled the country with most of the money. The FBI is involved now, but the money's gone. Victoria's parents lost even more than we did. They're selling their house in Greenwich, moving to a small condo in Florida. The implications began to dawn on me. What about the children's school? James's laugh was bitter. That's the irony. We can't afford it. Haven't been able to for months. Victoria's been too proud to admit it, keeps up appearances, but we're behind on everything. The house is in foreclosure. My job. There have been layoffs. I'm hanging on by a thread. He finally met my eyes, and I saw tears there. If it weren't for that anonymous trust fund covering the kids' tuition, they would have been expelled months ago. It's the only thing keeping them in school, giving them stability while everything else falls apart. My mind raced, but I kept my expression neutral. An anonymous trust? The Franklin Educational Trust. It appeared right around the time when we stopped. He couldn't finish the sentence. It covers everything for Emma and Oliver. Without it, I don't know what we'd do. Hillcrest is the one constant in their lives right now. Their friends, their teachers. It's all they have while Victoria and I try to figure out how to survive this. The room fell silent except for the distant hum of the city far below. I studied my son's face, seeing for the first time how the past 2 years had aged him. The arrogance was gone, replaced by the humility that often comes too late. "Why? Are you telling me this, James?" I asked quietly. He stood abruptly and walked to the window, staring out at the skyline. "Because I need help, not money," he added quickly, turning back to face me. "I wouldn't ask that. I know I have no right to ask anything from you after what I did, but the children." His voice broke. "Emma asks about you sometimes. She remembers the dollhouse, talks about it even though Victoria packed it away in the attic. And Oliver, he's been taking apart every toy he owns, trying to figure out how they work. Victoria doesn't understand it, gets frustrated. But I see. Dad in him, I see you." I remained seated, my hands folded in my lap to hide their trembling. "What exactly are you asking me, James?" He moved back to the table but didn't sit. "We're going to lose the house. Victoria is. She's not handling it well. Her parents are dealing with their own disaster. Her mother has had to sell most of her jewelry. The social circles they've cultivated for generations want nothing to do with them now that the money's gone." He swallowed hard. "I need to know if the children could stay with you for a while, just until we figure things out. Victoria doesn't. No, I'm asking this. She'd rather die than admit we need help, especially from the small-town grandmother who wasn't good enough for her children," I finished for him. The words hung in the air like an accusation. James flinched but didn't deny it. "Yes," he said simply. "From you. But I'm not asking for her. I'm asking for Emma and Oliver. They deserve better than watching their parents. fall apart. They deserve stability, love, the kind of home I grew up in and was too foolish to appreciate. I stood then, walking to the window to stand beside him. The city stretched out below us, a forest of steel and glass that suddenly seemed as artificial as the life James and Victoria had built. "Does Victoria know about your financial situation?" I asked. "She knows we're in trouble, but not how bad it is. She's still trying to keep up appearances, maxing out credit cards we can't pay, planning charity events we can't afford to attend. She's convinced something will come through, that her father will fix everything like he always has. But he can't. Not this time." I turned to face my son. "And what about you? What do you think?" His shoulders sagged. "I think I made the biggest mistake of my life when I let Victoria convince me that where I came from was something to be ashamed of. I think I traded everything real for an illusion of success. And I think my children are paying the price for my arrogance." The admission, raw and honest, cracked something open inside me. This was my son, not the polished executive or the social climber, but the boy I had raised, finally seeing clearly through the fog of pretense and misplaced values. "When do you need an answer?" I asked. Hope flickered in his eyes. "The house goes to auction in 6 weeks. But Emma's having trouble at school. She's anxious all the time, sensing the tension at home. Oliver's been acting out. Their teachers have called meetings. Victoria makes excuses, but I'll need to think about it," I said carefully. "And Victoria will need to agree. I won't take the children without her knowledge or consent." James nodded, looking relieved just to have been heard. "I understand. I'll talk to her. Somehow." He hesitated, then added, "Mom, about the past 2 years." I held up my hand. "Not now, James. Let's focus on the children first. The rest can wait." As I prepared to leave, gathering my purse and the composure I had maintained throughout our meeting, James said something that stopped me at the door. "The trust fund, the Franklin Trust. Do you know anything about it?" I turned back, meeting his eyes directly. "Why do you ask?" "Because it appeared right when we cut you off. Because it's managed by lawyers in Ohio. Because Franklin was Dad's aim." His voice was soft, wondering. "And because the timing was too perfect to be coincidence." I considered my response carefully. Sometimes help comes from unexpected places. Maybe someone understood that children shouldn't suffer for their parents' mistakes. James studied my face, and I saw understanding dawn slowly in his eyes. But he didn't push further. Instead, he simply said, "Thank you for coming today, for listening, for everything." The drive back to Cedar Falls was a blur of emotions and memories. I thought about Frank, wondering what he would have advised. He had always been the more forgiving one, quick to see the best in people, patient with their failings. "People come around, Ruth," he used to say. "Sometimes they just need to take the long way to get there." As I pulled into my driveway, I noticed Mrs. Patterson from next door working in her garden. She waved, calling out, "Beautiful day, isn't it, Ruth?" I agreed that it was, though my mind was far away, wrestling with the decision ahead. Taking in Emma and Oliver would mean reopening my heart to the possibility of loss. If Victoria's pride recovered along with their finances, would I face another banishment? Could I survive being cut off a second time? But as I unlocked my front door and stepped into the quiet house, I knew the answer. Frank's photo smiled at me from the mantle, and I could almost hear his voice. "Family is family, Ruth. You don't give up on them even when they give up on you." That evening, I called Bill Henderson. "Bill, I need you to prepare for the possibility that my grandchildren might be coming to stay with me. Also, I think it might be time to reveal the source of the Franklin Trust, but only when I say so. Can you draw up the necessary papers?" "Of course, Ruth. I've been wondering when this day would come. The truth has a way of finding its moment, doesn't it?" After hanging up, I sat in my garden as twilight painted the sky in shades of pink and gold. The butterfly bush was in full bloom, covered in purple flowers that attracted painted ladies and monarchs. I thought about Emma and Oliver, imagining them here, chasing butterflies, learning to plant seeds, discovering the simple joys that their structured world had denied them. Change was coming. I could feel it in the air like the approach of a summer storm. The carefully constructed walls between our worlds were crumbling, and soon we would all have to face the truth. That love, like water, always finds its way through the cracks, no matter how strong we build our barriers. 2 days after my meeting with James, my phone rang at 7 in the morning. This time, the number was one I recognized, James's home line, the one I hadn't seen on my caller ID in over 2 years. But it wasn't James on the line. The voice that greeted me was female, cultured, and unmistakably strained. Ruth? This is Victoria. The sound of my daughter-in-law's voice after 2 years of silence sent a complex rush of emotions through me. I gripped the phone tighter, steadying myself against the kitchen counter. Victoria, I managed. Good morning. There was a pause, filled with the weight of everything unsaid between us. When she spoke again, her voice had lost some of its polished veneer. James told me about your meeting, about his request. Another pause. I want you to know that I didn't send him. I wouldn't have asked. I understand, I replied, keeping my tone neutral despite the sting of her words. No, I don't think you do. Her voice cracked slightly. I need you to understand that this isn't. I'm not calling to beg. I just need to make some things clear before any decisions are made about my children. The possessiveness in her emphasis on my children wasn't lost on me, but I remained silent, letting her continue. If Emma and Oliver were to stay with you, and I'm not saying they will, there would need to be conditions, standards maintained. They're accustomed to a certain lifestyle, certain expectations. Victoria, I interrupted gently, perhaps we should have this conversation in person. The suggestion seemed to catch her off guard. Yes, perhaps we should. Could you come here? The children are at school, and I'd prefer to discuss this privately. 3 hours later, I found myself driving through the manicured streets of Westchester County for the first time in 2 years. The GPS guided me past gated communities and sprawling estates until I reached James and Victoria's neighborhood. Even knowing about their financial troubles, I was struck by the obvious affluence of the area. Pristine lawns maintained by landscaping crews, luxury cars in every driveway, and houses that looked more like small hotels than family homes. Their house was a Georgian-style colonial with perfect symmetry and a circular driveway featuring an ornate fountain that was, I noticed, no longer running. As I parked my modest Honda beside a Range Rover with dealer plates still attached, I wondered how long they'd been keeping up appearances on borrowed money. Victoria answered the door herself, something that surprised me, as I'd assumed they would have household staff. She was impeccably dressed in cream-colored slacks and a silk blouse, her blonde hair perfectly styled, but the shadows under her carefully made-up eyes told a different story. "Ruth," she said, stepping aside to let me enter. "Thank you for coming." The foyer was a testament to Victoria's eye for design. Marble floors, a sweeping staircase, fresh flowers in a crystal vase. But as she led me to the living room, I noticed small signs of distress. Lighter patches on the walls where paintings had been removed, a china cabinet half empty, the subtle absence of objects that had likely been sold to maintain their facade. "Please sit," Victoria gestured to an elegant sofa. "Can I offer you anything? Coffee? Tea?" "No, thank you." I settled onto the edge of the sofa, maintaining a respectful distance as she took a chair across from me. For a moment, we simply looked at each other. Up close, I could see how the strain had affected her. The woman before me was thinner. Then I remembered. Her designer clothes hanging loosely, her perfectly manicured nails bitten down at the edges. "I suppose James told you everything," she began, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "He told me about the financial difficulties." "Yes." Victoria's laugh was brittle. "Difficulties, that's one way to put it. Did he tell you that my parents are moving to a retirement community in Florida? That my mother had to sell her grandmother's diamonds? That the people we've known our entire lives suddenly don't return our calls?" The bitterness in her voice was palpable. But underneath it, I heard something else. Fear, humiliation, the sound of someone watching their entire worldview crumble. "I'm sorry you're going through this," I said sincerely. She looked at me sharply, as if searching for sarcasm or judgment, but found neither. Her shoulders sagged slightly. "Are you? After the way I've treated you? After I kept your grandchildren from you because I thought—" She trailed off, looking away. "Because you thought I wasn't good enough for them?" The words hung in the air between us. Victoria flinched but didn't deny it. "I grew up differently than James," she said finally. "In my world, there were rules, standards, ways of doing things that had been established for generations. I thought I was protecting Emma and Oliver, giving them advantages, ensuring they had every opportunity. And now?" She stood abruptly, walking to the window overlooking their expansive backyard. "Now I realize that everything I thought was solid was built on sand. The connections, the social standing, the wealth, it all evaporated the moment the money disappeared. Do you know how many of our supposed friends have offered to help? 0. Not one." She turned back to face me. "But you're here. After everything I did, you're willing to take in my children. I don't understand it." "They're my grandchildren," I said simply. "Family takes care of family." Victoria's carefully maintained composure cracked. She sank back into her chair, covering her face with her hands. When she looked up, tears had smeared her mascara. "I've made such a mess of everything. Emma's having panic attacks. She won't sleep in her own bed anymore. Oliver keeps asking why Daddy looks sad all the time. They know something's wrong, but I keep pretending everything's fine. I'm so tired of pretending." Instinctively, I moved to sit beside her on the arm of her chair, hesitating only a moment before placing my hand on her shoulder. She didn't pull away. "The first step is stopping the pretense," I said gently. "Children are more perceptive than we give them credit for. They'd rather know the truth than sense the lies." "But how do I tell them we're losing everything? That they might have to change schools, leave their friends?" "You tell them that families sometimes face challenges, but that they have people who love them and will make sure they're taken care of. You tell them that homes aren't just houses and that wealth isn't measured only in money." Victoria wiped her eyes with a tissue she pulled from her pocket. "James said something similar. He's been different lately, more like the man I fell in love with in college, before all this." She gestured vaguely at the room around us. "Crisis has a way of stripping away pretense," I observed. "Sometimes we have to lose everything to remember what really matters." "I keep thinking about that dollhouse," Victoria said suddenly. "The one you made for Emma's birthday. I was so awful about it, but last week when I was packing up some things to sell, I found it in the attic. Emma saw me with it and lit up, like Christmas morning." She remembered every detail, the tiny curtains, the little lights. She asked if Great-Grandpa Frank was in heaven making dollhouses for angel children. My throat tightened. "What did you tell her?" "I told her yes, and then I sat in the attic and cried for an hour." Victoria looked at me directly. "I'm sorry. Ruth, for everything. For judging you, for keeping the children away, for thinking that my way was the only right way. I was wrong." The apology, so unexpected and sincere, washed over me like warm rain after a long drought. I reached out and took her hand. We all make mistakes, Victoria. The important thing is what we do once we recognize them. She squeezed my hand briefly before pulling away, some of her composure returning. About the children staying with you, I need to know they'll be okay, that they won't feel less than. They're used to certain things. They're used to material things, I corrected gently. What they need are stable routines, consistent love, and the security of knowing they're valued for who they are, not what they have. I can provide that. Your house. I remember it's quite small. It's cozy, I agreed. 3 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a yard with a garden. No fountain in the driveway, I'm afraid, but there's a tire swing in the backyard and a neighbor's dog who loves children. There's also a library within walking distance and a park where the community gathers for outdoor movies in the summer. Victoria was quiet for a moment, processing this. And school? Cedar Falls Elementary is excellent. Small classes, dedicated teachers. Emma would be in Mrs. Foster's 2nd grade. She's wonderful with anxious children. Oliver would have Mr. Peterson for kindergarten. He used to be an engineer before becoming a teacher. Loves when kids take things apart to see how they work. You've already researched this. I've been preparing for the possibility since James called, I admitted. But Victoria, this only works if you're truly comfortable with it. The children will sense any reluctance or resentment. She stood, again, pacing the room. I don't know how to be comfortable with any of this. 6 months ago, I was planning Emma's application strategy for prep schools that feed into the Ivy League. Now I'm grateful for an anonymous trust fund that keeps them at Hillcrest, and I'm considering sending them to live with my mother-in-law because I can't provide stability anymore. There's no shame in accepting help when you need it. Isn't there? She turned to face me. In my world, there is. Or was. I don't even know what my world is anymore. The sound of a key in the front door interrupted our conversation. James entered, looking surprised to see us together. Mom, I didn't know you were coming today. I invited her, Victoria said. We needed to talk. James looked between us, clearly trying to gauge the emotional temperature of the room. And? Victoria straightened her shoulders. I think we need to consider what's best for Emma and Oliver right now. And maybe what's best is for them to have some stability while we sort through this mess. The relief on James's face was palpable. He moved to stand beside Victoria, not quite touching her but offering support through proximity. It wouldn't be forever, he said quickly. Just until we get back on our feet. I've got some job prospects, and there's a possibility of recovering some of the investment through the FBI investigation. I held up my hand. Let's not put a timeline on it yet. The important thing is making sure Emma and Oliver feel secure. We can figure out the details as we go. Victoria nodded slowly. There's something else, the trust fund, the one paying their tuition. Do either of you know anything about it? James and I exchanged glances. Why do you ask? He said carefully. Because I've been trying to find out who's behind it. I thought maybe it was my father's doing, a way to help without admitting he was helping. But he swears he knows nothing about it. The lawyers won't tell me anything, citing confidentiality. It's driving me crazy not knowing who we're indebted to. I made a decision in that moment. The Franklin Educational Trust was established to ensure that Emma and Oliver's education wouldn't be disrupted regardless of circumstances. The donor wanted to remain anonymous to avoid any feeling of obligation or indebtedness. Victoria's eyes narrowed. You know who it is. I know that the donor's intentions were pure and that they wanted only what was best for the children. Ruth. Victoria's voice was barely above a whisper. Is it you? James stepped forward. Victoria, does it matter? The trust has kept the kids in school. It's given them stability during all this chaos. It matters, she insisted. eyes never leaving my face. It matters because if it's what I think it is, then I've been an even bigger fool than I realized. The room fell silent. Outside, I could hear birds singing and the distant sound of a lawnmower. Inside, the weight of 2 years of mistakes and misunderstandings pressed down on all of us. The money came from the sale of Mitchell's hardware, I said finally. Frank and I lived simply. We saved carefully. When he died and I sold the business, there was more than enough to ensure my grandchildren would have the education their parents wanted for them. Victoria sank onto the sofa, her face a study in conflicting emotions. You've been paying for their school this entire time. While I was keeping them from you, telling myself you weren't good enough to be in their lives, you were ensuring they could stay at Hillcrest. Children shouldn't suffer for adult disagreements, I said simply. All this time, Victoria murmured. I thought we were managing on our own. I was so proud of maintaining their place at school despite everything else falling apart. And it was you. James sat beside her, taking her hand. Mom didn't do it to make us feel indebted. She did it because she loves Emma and Oliver. Which makes me feel worse, Victoria said with a shaky laugh. It would be easier if there were strings attached, if this were some kind of manipulation. But it's not, is it? It's just love. Unconditional love. The kind I've been too proud to show or accept. I moved to sit across from them again. Victoria, you love your children fiercely. That's never been in question. You want the best for them. We just had different ideas about what the best looks like. Your idea seems to be working better than mine, she admitted. We spent the next hour discussing practical arrangements. The children would finish the current school term at Hillcrest. Only a few weeks remained. Then they would spend the summer with me in Cedar Falls while James and Victoria dealt with lawyers, job hunting, and finding a new place to live. If things weren't settled by fall, we would enroll them in Cedar Falls Elementary. I want to be involved, Victoria insisted. Regular video calls, visits when we can manage it. I'm not abandoning my children. Of course not, I assured her. This is temporary support, not a replacement. They need their parents. As I prepared to leave, Victoria walked me to the door. Ruth, I need to ask you something. The dollhouse. Would you help me restore it? Some of the pieces got damaged in storage. I'd like to give it back to Emma properly, maybe as a going-away present, a reminder of home while she's with you. The request, small as it was, felt like a bridge being built across the chasm between us. I'd be happy to, I said. Frank kept detailed notes about everything he built. I still have them. Thank you. She hesitated, then added, for everything. I'm not good at this, at admitting I was wrong, at asking for help. But I'm trying to learn. We're all learning, I replied. Every day, if we're lucky. The drive home was filled with a mixture of anticipation and trepidation. In a matter of weeks, my quiet life would be transformed by the arrival of 2 young children who barely knew me. The spare bedroom would need to be converted into a space for Emma, while Oliver could have what I'd been using as a craft room. The tire swing in the backyard would need to be checked for safety. Child locks would need to be installed, and the garden gate fixed. But beyond the practical considerations lay deeper questions. How would Emma and Oliver adjust to a simpler life? Would they resent the change from their spacious house to my modest home? Would they miss their friends, their routines, their familiar surroundings? As I pulled into Cedar Falls, passing the welcome to our town sign that Frank had helped design, years ago, I realized that I was about to discover whether the values I'd held all my life, about community, simplicity, and the true meaning of wealth, could still resonate with a new generation raised in very different circumstances. The next morning, I called Bill Henderson. It's time to make the trust ownership public, I told him. The family knows now. Let's make it official. Are you sure, Ruth? Once it's public, there's no going back to anonymity. I'm sure. Secrets have caused enough damage in this family. It's time for transparency. After hanging up, I went to my garden, where the morning glories were just opening to the sun. Change was coming. Big, life-altering change. But as I knelt to pull weeds around the tomato plants, I felt a sense of rightness about it all. Frank had always said that gardens teach us about cycles, seasons of growth and dormancy, of pruning and flourishing. Perhaps families were the same way. Perhaps this period of upheaval was just preparation for new growth. 2 weeks later, I received a call from Emma's teacher at Hillcrest. Mrs. Worthington introduced herself and explained that she'd been notified about the upcoming change in Emma's living situation. "I wanted to touch base with you directly," she said. "Emma's been having some anxiety issues in class. She's a bright, sensitive child, but the tension at home has been affecting her. I understand she'll be coming to live with you temporarily. Yes, for the summer at least, possibly longer. I think it could be good for her. She talks about you sometimes mentions a special dollhouse and stories about her great-grandpa Frank. There's obviously a connection there, even if you haven't been able to see each other much." The conversation continued with practical details about Emma's academic progress and emotional needs. After we hung up, I sat for a long moment, thinking about the threads that connect families across time and distance. Even separated, even rejected, the bonds had remained. Emma had remembered the dollhouse, remembered stories about Frank. Perhaps love, like water, always finds a way to flow toward where it's needed. That evening, James called with an update. The house goes to auction next month. We've found an apartment in Queens. Nothing fancy, but it's in a decent school district. I've got a second interview with a smaller firm next week. The salary won't be what I was making, but it's honest work. How's Victoria handling it? Better than I expected. She's been selling things online, learning to budget. Yesterday, she actually cooked dinner instead of ordering in. Burned the chicken, but we ate it anyway and laughed about it. I haven't seen her laugh like that in years. The first day Emma and Oliver came to stay in Cedar Falls was a study in contrasts. Their designer luggage, downsized but still bearing luxury labels, looking out of place on my well-worn welcome mat. Their uncertain expressions betraying the fear that comes with leaving everything familiar behind. I had spent the previous week transforming my home to accommodate them, converting my craft room into a bedroom with cheerful yellow walls and comfortable twin beds, stocking the kitchen with foods a nutritionist friend assured me were appropriate for growing children, and repairing the tire swing in the backyard that had hung unused since James was a boy. As Victoria and James helped unload the car, I noticed how much they had changed in just these few weeks. The polished veneer of success had worn away, revealing something more authentic underneath. Victoria's hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, rather than the elaborate style she'd maintained even during our difficult conversation about the children. James wore jeans with a small tear at the knee that he hadn't bothered to hide or replace. Their expressions held a mixture of relief and grief, the paradoxical emotions of parents who know they're making the right decision for their children, even as it breaks their hearts. The drive wasn't too bad, James said, carrying a small suitcase up the front steps. We hit some traffic outside New York, but the kids were great. Oliver counted all the different types of trucks we passed. 57, Oliver declared proudly, looking up from the matchbox car he'd been rolling along my porch railing. At 6, he was all energy and curiosity, his dark hair perpetually tousled, his eyes taking in everything with scientific precision. Emma, 8, and already showing signs of the beauty she would grow into, stood slightly behind her mother, one hand clutching Victoria's designer jeans. "Do you have internet here?" she asked softly, the question revealing her greatest concern about this temporary exile from civilization. "We do," I assured her with a smile. "Not as fast as what you're used to, perhaps, but it works just fine for video calls and most websites. And the library has computers you can use for school projects." Victoria placed a protective hand on Emma's shoulder. Emma's been nervous about staying connected with her friends from Hillcrest, she explained. We've promised that she can keep in touch and that this isn't forever. I nodded, understanding the complex emotions at play. Of course. Why don't we go inside and I can show you where everything is? I've made lemonade, an old family recipe your father might remember. James's expression softened at the mention of the lemonade. With the mint from the garden and the secret ingredient you would never tell me? The very same, I confirmed, leading the way inside. The small gesture, remembering a childhood treat, seemed to break some of the tension. James's shoulders relaxed slightly, and even Victoria managed a tentative smile. The house tour revealed more about the children than any conversation could have. Oliver gravitantly toward Frank's old tool bench in the garage, his eyes widening at the neatly arranged hammers, screwdrivers, and wrenches. "My grandpa used these?" he asked, his voice hushed with reverence. "Every single one," I told him. He believed in taking care of his tools. "Some of these are older than your father." Oliver ran his fingers along the pegboard where the tools hung. "Did he fix things with them?" "Everything," I said. "From leaky faucets to broken furniture. He even built the tire swing in the backyard." Could I learn to fix things too?" The hopefulness in his voice tugged at my heart. "I think your grandfather would love that." Emma, meanwhile, was drawn to the small sunroom off the kitchen where I kept my plants and reading chair. The afternoon light filtered through the windows, creating patterns on the wooden floor. "It's peaceful here," she observed, running her hand along the spine of a book on the shelf, like a secret garden inside a house. Victoria watched her daughter with a complex expression, pride mingled with something like regret. "Emma's always had an eye for beautiful spaces," she said quietly. "She's quite artistic, though we haven't. That is, with her academic schedule. There hasn't been much time for developing those interests." I chose not to point out the irony, that the mother who had once deemed me too unsophisticated was now entrusting me with nurturing her daughter's artistic sensibilities. Instead, I simply said, "The community center offers wonderful art classes on Saturday mornings. Perhaps Emma might enjoy those." The conversation over lemonade and homemade cookies was stilted at first, filled with awkward pauses and overly polite exchanges. But as the afternoon wore on, the children began to relax. Oliver discovered the collection of smooth stones Frank and I had gathered from various lakes and rivers over the years, each labeled with its origin. Emma found an old sketchbook of mine and paged through it with increasing interest. "You draw?" she asked, surprising everyone with her direct question. "Just as a hobby," I explained. "Your grandfather was much more talented. He could sketch anything: buildings, people, landscapes. He designed the town's welcome sign. No." Emma looked at me with new eyes, reassessing the grandmother she had been taught to dismiss as provincial. "Could you teach me?" Before I could answer, Victoria intervened. "Emma, let's not impose too much on Grandma Ruth right away. She's already doing so much by having you stay." "It's no imposition," I said firmly. "I'd love to share whatever skills I have. That's what grandmothers are for." The moment for James and Victoria's departure arrived too quickly. We'd agreed that a clean break would be easier for the children. No lingering goodbyes, no drawn-out scenes. Still, watching Oliver's small arms wrap around his father's neck, seeing Emma trying to be brave as Victoria kissed her forehead, I wondered if any separation between parents and children could ever be truly clean. "We'll call tonight," James promised, his voice rough with emotion. "And we'll be here every other weekend. It's not that far, just a few hours' drive." Victoria straightened Emma's hair with trembling fingers. "Be good for Grandma Ruth. Remember your manners. And don't forget to practice your piano. There. Must be somewhere in town you can use a piano, right?" This last question was directed at me with a hint of her old anxiety about maintaining proper standards. "The church has a beautiful grand piano," I assured her, "and Mrs. Patterson next door gives lessons. I've already spoken to her about Emma continuing her studies." Something like gratitude flickered across Victoria's face. "Thank you. That's very thoughtful." As their car pulled away, the children stood on the porch waving until it disappeared around the corner. Then Oliver turned to me, his expression serious beyond his years. "Are they going to be okay? Daddy looks tired all the time now." The question caught me off guard with its perceptiveness. "They're going through a difficult time," I answered honestly. "But they're working hard to make things better. And they love you both very much." Emma, always more guarded than her brother, asked the question that really mattered to them. "Will they come back for us?" "Absolutely," I said without hesitation. "This is temporary. They just need some time to sort things out." Whether the children believed me or not, they seemed to accept the answer for now. As we went back inside, I realized that the real work was just beginning. These children had been raised in a world of luxury and privilege that had suddenly collapsed around them. My job wasn't just to provide shelter and supervision. It was to help them discover that there was value, real, lasting value, in a simpler life filled with creativity, community, and genuine connection. That first evening established patterns that would carry us through the coming months. I kept dinner simple but nutritious: roast chicken with vegetables from my garden, fresh bread from the local bakery, and homemade apple crisp for dessert. Victoria had sent detailed instructions about the children's preferences and dietary restrictions, but I noticed that these picky eaters cleaned their plates without complaint. Perhaps hunger was the best seasoning, or perhaps the food simply tasted better when it came from soil they could touch and plants they could see growing. Bedtime revealed the anxieties that both children had been hiding. Emma asked 3 times if the doors were locked, while Oliver wanted to know exactly how far away his parents were in case of emergency. "Will you leave the hall light on?" Emma asked, her confident facade cracking to reveal the worried child beneath. "Just so we can see if we need to get up." "Of course," I said, sitting on the edge of her bed. "And my room is just across the hall if you need anything." "Anything at all." Oliver clutched a small toy car his father had given him. "If Daddy calls, you'll wake us up, right? Even if we're asleep?" "If that's what you want," I agreed. "Though I think you'll both be very tired tonight after all the excitement." I was right. Despite their fears and the strangeness of their new surroundings, both children fell asleep within minutes of their heads touching the pillows. I stood in the doorway watching them for a moment, these grandchildren I had barely been, permitted to know, now entrusted to my care by the very people who had once deemed me unworthy of their presence. James called as promised, his voice low to avoid waking Victoria, who had, he explained, finally fallen asleep after days of insomnia. "How are they?" he asked, the question loaded with parental anxiety. "Asleep," I assured him. "They're resilient." James. "Children adapt better than we give them credit for." "I hope so." He paused, and I could sense him struggling with what to say next. "Mom, I'm sorry. For everything. For keeping them from you. For how we treated you. I don't know how to make it right." "You already have," I told him. "You trusted me with what matters most to you. That's more important than any apology." Another pause. "The trust fund. What made you do that?" "After how we shut you out." I considered my answer carefully. "They're my grandchildren, James. Love doesn't stop just because it's rejected. It waits. It hopes. It continues to reach out in whatever ways it can. I'm not sure I would have been that generous." The word seemed inadequate for what he was trying to express. "You would have," I assured him. "You're more like your father than you realize, and Frank never could hold a grudge, especially when it came to family. The mention of Frank seemed to settle something for James. "I miss him," he admitted. "I wish he could see his grandchildren." "He can," I said simply. "And he'd be so proud of you right now." For losing everything? For having to send my kids away because I can't provide for them? For having the courage to do what's best for them, even when it hurts? For recognizing that sometimes our greatest gift to our children is humility? After we hung up, I sat in Frank's old armchair, looking out at the night sky visible through the living room window. The stars seemed especially bright, as they often did in Cedar Falls away from city lights. I thought about the strange path that had led us here, how Victoria's rejection had wounded me deeply, how establishing the trust fund had been an act of love when no other connection was permitted, how financial disaster had accomplished what my direct efforts never could, bringing my grandchildren into my life. "Well, Frank," I whispered to the empty room, "you always said everything happens for a reason. I'm starting to believe you might have been right." The first week established rhythms and routines that would carry us through the transition. Cedar Falls awoke earlier than Westchester. The distant crowing of roosters and early morning light filtering through curtains less substantial than the blackout shades the children were accustomed to meant that Emma and Oliver were up by 6:30. Their first morning, standing uncertainly in the hallway when I emerged from my bedroom. "Good morning," I greeted them cheerfully. "Did you sleep well?" "It's very quiet here," Emma observed. "No cars or sirens." "Just birds," Oliver added, "and something that made a weird sound, like this." He attempted to imitate what I immediately recognized as the distinctive call of a whippoorwill. "That's a bird too," I explained. "A special kind that sings at night. Your father used to think they were telling ghost stories to each other." This idea delighted Oliver, while Emma looked skeptical, a dichotomy that perfectly captured their personalities. Oliver was all imagination and enthusiasm. Emma was practical and cautious, weighing each experience carefully before committing to an opinion. Breakfast became a small lesson in food origins. The eggs came from Mrs. Patterson's chickens next door. "Real chickens? That we can see?" Oliver asked in amazement. The jam was made from berries I had picked and preserved the previous summer, and the bread came from the town bakery where the baker, Mr. Hoffman, still used his grandfather's German recipes. "Food tastes different when you know where it comes from," I explained as they savored flavors more intense than what they were used to. "And there's something special about eating what comes from your own community." After breakfast, we walked into town. A novel experience for children used to being driven everywhere. The half-mile stroll became an adventure as we greeted neighbors working in their gardens, spotted a rabbit darting into the underbrush, and collected interesting leaves and stones along the way. Emma, initially reluctant to hike as she called, it was soon pointing out architectural details on the older homes we passed. "That house has little windows inside the roof," she observed, pointing to a Victorian with dormer windows. "And that one has a porch that wraps all the way around." "Very observant," I praised her. "The windows in the roof are called dormers, and that wraparound porch is a traditional feature of farmhouses in this region. People would sit out there in the evenings to catch the breeze before air conditioning was invented." Her eyes widened. "People lived without air conditioning?" "Your great-grandparents did," I told her. "In fact, this town didn't get electricity until the 1930s. Before that, everyone used oil lamps and ice boxes instead of refrigerators." "Like camping?" Oliver asked, trying to make sense of such a foreign concept. "A bit like that, yes. The town center of Cedar Falls consisted of a main street with shops lining both sides, a small park with a gazebo where summer concerts were held, and civic buildings like the library, town hall, and post office clustered around a central square. Nothing fancy by Westchester standards, but clean, well-maintained, and bustling with morning activity. Our first stop was the library, a limestone building with wide steps leading to heavy wooden doors. Inside, the scent of books and furniture polish created an atmosphere of quiet reverence. Mrs. Ellis, the head librarian who had been a fixture of my life for decades, looked up from her desk with a warm smile that turned curious when she spotted the children. "Ruth Mitchell, don't tell me these are your grandchildren? The ones we've heard so much about but never seen?" I introduced Emma and Oliver, who displayed the excellent manners Victoria had drilled into them, shaking hands and making appropriate eye contact as they greeted Mrs. Ellis. "We'd like to get library cards," I explained. "These two are staying with me for a while, and they're both avid readers." Mrs. Ellis beamed. "Nothing makes a librarian happier than issuing cards to young readers. Let's get you set up right away." The process of getting their own library cards, complete with their signatures written in careful script, seemed to delight the children in a way that surprised me. These were children who had been given every material advantage, yet the simple plastic cards represented a type of independence and responsibility they treasured. "I can check out any book I want?" Emma confirmed, her eyes scanning the children's section with new interest. "Up to 10 at a time," Mrs. Ellis informed her. "And you can use the computers for research or join our summer reading program that starts next week." Oliver had already found the science section and was flipping through a book about insects with fascination. "Grandma Ruth, did you know that ants can lift 20 times their own body weight? That would be like me lifting a car." As we left the library with a stack of books, Emma had selected several about art and a novel about a girl who discovers a secret garden, while Oliver had chosen books about insects, simple machines, and a children's encyclopedia of how things work. I noticed a subtle shift in their demeanor. The library had given them something their parents' financial disaster had taken away, a sense of abundance. Here were thousands of books they could borrow for free, knowledge and adventures waiting between covers, all accessible with those simple plastic cards. Our next stop was the Cedar Falls Market, a combination grocery store and farm stand that sourced much of its produce locally. The owner, Mr. Chen, greeted me by name and presented each child with a small apple. "From my orchard," he explained, his accent still carrying traces of his native Taiwan, though he'd lived in Cedar Falls for 30 years. "Best apples in the county. No chemicals, just sunshine and good soil." Oliver bit into his immediately, his eyes widening at the tartness. "It tastes different than our apples at home." "Because it was picked yesterday, not shipped from across the country," Mr. Chen explained with pride. "Fresh makes all the difference." As we shopped, the children were fascinated by how many people greeted me by name, asked about Frank even, though he had been gone for years, and showed genuine interest in Emma and Oliver without having met them before. "How do they all know about us?" Emma whispered as we examined tomatoes. "Small towns are like that," I explained. "News travels fast, and people care about each other's families. Everyone here knew your father when he was your age, and they've heard about you over the years." "But we never came to visit," she said with the direct honesty of childhood. "Mom said there wasn't any point because there's nothing to do here." I chose my words carefully, aware of the delicate balance between honesty and respect for their parents. "Different people enjoy different things, Emma. Your mother is used to cities with museums and theaters and fancy restaurants. Cedar Falls has simpler pleasures, community events, nature, knowing your neighbors. Neither is better or worse, just different." She considered this seriously. "I think I might like it here," she admitted, as if confessing a small betrayal. "The library is nice, and people seem friendly." "It's a good place to be a child," I told her. "Your father had a happy childhood here, even without all the advantages you've had." By the time we returned home for lunch, the children had begun to relax into their new environment. The afternoon was spent exploring the backyard, discovering the vegetable garden with its neat rows of tomatoes, beans, carrots, and herbs, investigating the tire swing hanging from the massive oak tree, finding the stone bird bath Frank had made decades ago, now surrounded by butterfly-attracting flowers. "Could we grow our own vegetables?" Oliver asked, fascinated by the tiny green tomatoes forming on the vines. "Something we could eat?" "Absolutely," I said. "There's still time to plant radishes, lettuce, and bush beans. They grow quickly, enough that you'd have a harvest before summer's end." "I've never grown food before," he admitted. "Just a bean in a cup at school once." "Well, then it's high time you learned. Gardening was your great-grandfather's favorite hobby. He always said there's something miraculous about putting a seed in the ground and watching it become food for your table." That evening after dinner, a simple meal of spaghetti with fresh tomato sauce that both children helped prepare, we sat on the front porch drinking lemonade and watching fireflies begin to appear in the gathering dusk. The ritual of sitting outdoors as the day cooled was one I had shared with Frank throughout our marriage, but it was entirely novel to Emma and Oliver. "They're like tiny flashlights," Oliver marveled, watching the fireflies blink on and off. "How do they do that?" "It's a chemical reaction in their bodies," I explained. "They use it to find each other in the dark." "Could we catch some?" he asked hopefully. "We could," I agreed, "but only if we let them go before bedtime. They need to be free to find their firefly friends." Emma, who had been quietly observing the scene, suddenly asked, "Did Dad do that when he was little? Catch fireflies?" "All the time," I told her. He and his friends would catch them in jars with holes punched in the lids. Sometimes they'd keep them on their bedside tables like nature's nightlights, but never for more than an evening. "Your grandfather was very strict about respecting living things. I wish Dad was here," Oliver said, his voice small in the gathering darkness. "He'd like catching fireflies, too." "I'm sure he would," I agreed, feeling the weight of their parents' absence. "But you can tell him all about it when he calls. Before bedtime. And you can show him when he visits this weekend." The mention of the upcoming visit brightened their mood. Despite the pleasures of this new environment, both children were acutely aware of the separation from their parents. The promised nightly calls became anchors in their days, moments of reconnection that assured them they weren't forgotten or abandoned. That night, as I tucked them into bed after their call with James and Victoria, Emma asked me a question that revealed how much she had been processing. "Grandma Ruth, are we poor now?" The directness of the question took me by surprise. "What makes you ask that, sweetheart?" She twisted a strand of hair around her finger, a habit I'd noticed emerged when she was thinking deeply. At school, before we left, Madison Winters told everyone that my dad lost all our money, and that's why we couldn't come to her birthday party at the Plaza Hotel. She said we're probably on welfare now. My heart ached for the casual cruelty children could inflict on one another, especially in the status-conscious environment of Hillcrest Academy. "Emma, families go through different financial circumstances throughout their lives. Right now, your parents are facing challenges because of some investments that didn't work out. But that doesn't make you poor in the way Madison meant it." "But we don't live in our house anymore," she persisted. "And I heard Mom crying about selling her jewelry, and now we're here instead of with them." I sat on the edge of her bed, choosing my words carefully. "Your parents are making responsible decisions during a difficult time. They've moved to a smaller place to save money, and yes, they've had to sell some possessions. But they're doing these things to take care of what really matters, you and Oliver." "But are we poor?" she repeated, needing a direct answer. "By Westchester standards, perhaps your family has less money than before," I acknowledged. "But in the ways that truly matter, you are rich beyond measure. You have parents who love you enough to make hard choices for your benefit. You have your health, your intelligence, your creativity. You have opportunities that most children in the world would consider extraordinary. And you have people, not just your parents, but me and a whole community here, who care about you. She was silent for a moment, absorbing this perspective. Madison said people will treat us differently now. Some people might, I admitted. People who measure others by their possessions or social status. But those aren't the people whose opinions matter, Emma. True friends value you for who you are, not what you have. Is that why you helped us even after Mom and Dad wouldn't let you see us? Her question cut to the heart of everything that had happened. I helped because I love you, I said simply. Because you're my grandchildren, and that's more important than any disagreement or misunderstanding between adults. She reached out unexpectedly and hugged me, her thin arms tightening around my neck. I'm glad we're staying with you, she whispered. Even if we are poor now. That night, lying in bed listening to the familiar sounds of my house settling, I thought about Emma's question. Were they poor? By the standards of their former life, certainly. But by most meaningful measures, they were enormously wealthy, in potential, in opportunity, in the love surrounding them. The challenge would be helping them see that wealth amid the loss of the material trappings they had been taught to value. The remaining days of that first week fell into a comfortable pattern. Mornings began with breakfast and chores, simple. Tasks like feeding the birds, watering plants, or helping with dishes. The children, to my surprise, embraced these responsibilities with enthusiasm. In their previous life, household work had been invisible, done by staff who appeared and disappeared without disrupting the family's routine. Here, they discovered the satisfaction of contributing meaningfully to the household's operation. I made the beds all by myself, Oliver announced proudly one morning. And I didn't even use the special corner tucking thing Mom's housekeeper always did. They look wonderful, I assured him. Very neat and tidy. Emma, watching her brother's pleasure in this simple accomplishment, volunteered to help prepare lunch. I can make sandwiches, she offered. I used to watch Carmen make them for our school lunches. Afternoons were devoted to exploration of the town, the nearby creek, the community garden where I had a small plot, or the workshops and businesses that made up Cedar Falls' economic life. We visited the local woodworker who had apprenticed under Frank decades ago and now created furniture shipped to galleries nationwide. We stopped by the small factory where work gloves had been manufactured since the 1920s, now employing the fourth generation of some local families. Through these excursions, the children began to understand that Cedar Falls, despite its modest appearance, was not the cultural backwater Victoria had described. It was a community with history, tradition, and a quiet pride in craftsmanship that had sustained it through economic changes that had hollowed out many similar small towns. People make things here, Oliver observed with the simplicity of a child cutting through pretense. Real things that other people use. They do, I agreed. That's been the heart of this town since it was founded, making useful, beautiful things with skill and care. One afternoon, we visited the Cedar Falls Historical Society, housed in one of the town's oldest buildings, a former bank with impressive stone columns at its entrance. Inside, displays chronicled the town's development from a frontier settlement to a manufacturing center to its current identity as a blend of traditional industries and newer enterprises like organic farming and artisanal crafts. Emma was drawn to a display of black and white photographs showing the town in various eras. It looks the same, but different, she observed, comparing a 1930s image of Main Street with the road we had walked that morning. Communities change. Slowly here, I explained. People value history and tradition, though we adapt when necessary. Oliver had discovered a display case containing tools from various periods, from hand-forged iron implements to early mechanical devices. His eyes widened at a hand drill with a wooden handle and metal gears. This looks like the one in Grandpa's workshop. It probably is similar, I agreed. Your grandfather believed in quality tools that last for generations. Some of his favorites were passed down from his own father. The society's curator, Mrs. Whitman, overheard our conversation and joined us. "You must be Ruth Mitchell's grandchildren," she said warmly. "I've heard you're staying for the summer." More evidence of the town's interconnectedness, news, traveled quickly, but without the judgmental edge it might have carried in Westchester. Here, the children's presence was cause for celebration, not gossip about their parents' financial downfall. Mrs. Whitman pointed to a photograph I hadn't noticed, a group of men standing proudly in front of a newly constructed building. "That's your great-grandfather," she told the children, indicating a tall man with a serious expression. "Richard Mitchell. He helped establish the town's first hardware store, which eventually became Mitchell's Hardware that your grandparents ran for many years." Emma and Oliver stared at the image with newfound interest, a tangible connection to their family history that predated their parents' current circumstances. I watched understanding dawn in their expressions. They came from somewhere, belonged to something larger than the affluent but rootless existence they had known in Westchester. "Our family helped build this town?" Oliver asked, his voice filled with wonder. "Very much so," Mrs. Whitman confirmed. "The Mitchells have been part of Cedar Falls for 5 generations. The hardware store was a cornerstone of Main Street for nearly a century. Your grandparents were known for helping people during hard times, extending credit when farmers had bad years, donating supplies to community projects, teaching workshops so people could make their own repairs." I hadn't spoken much about Frank's and my role in the community, preferring to let the children form their own impressions. But Mrs. Whitman's words painted a picture of their heritage that contradicted the narrative they had absorbed in Westchester, where small-town merchants were considered quaint at best, unsophisticated at worst. "Why isn't the store still there?" Emma asked, ever practical. "If it was important?" "Times change," I explained gently. "Large chain stores made it difficult for small hardware stores to compete. After your grandfather passed away, I made the decision to sell rather than try to continue alone." What I didn't add was that the sale had provided the financial security that eventually funded their education through the Franklin Trust, that the small-town business their mother had dismissed as provincial had ultimately ensured their continued enrollment at the prestigious academy she valued so highly. Some revelations would wait for when they were older. The weekend brought James and Victoria's first visit, an event both anticipated and feared by all of us. Would the children regress emotionally at seeing their parents? Would Victoria find fault with my care? Would the contrasts between their former life and current circumstances prove too painful? I spent Friday morning preparing, not in the frantic cleaning that might suggest inadequacy, but in the careful attention to details that would make everyone comfortable. Fresh flowers from the garden brightened the kitchen table. Clean sheets on the guest room bed in case they decided to stay overnight. A meal planned that would be familiar to the children but not attempt to recreate the sophisticated cuisine Victoria preferred. The children were jittery with excitement, checking the clock every few minutes, standing at windows to watch for the car. When it finally appeared in the driveway, not the luxury vehicle they were accustomed to seeing their parents in, but a modest sedan with rental plates, they bolted from the house like sprinters at the sound of a starting gun. The reunion was everything it should be: hugs, kisses, exclamations over how much they'd grown in just a week. They hadn't, of course, but parents often perceive such changes. Victoria looked both better and worse than when I'd last seen her. Thinner, with shadows under her eyes suggesting ongoing stress, but also more authentic somehow, as if she'd stopped striving to maintain a facade. James carried a small cooler from the car. "We brought a few things from that bakery near our apartment," he explained as we walked toward the house. "Nothing fancy, but the cookies are pretty amazing." This simple gesture, bringing food to share rather than expecting to be catered to, highlighted the shift in their perspective. Victoria, too, arrived with a gift. Not the expensive but impersonal presents she might have chosen before, but a set of drawing pencils for Emma and a beginner's microscope for Oliver. Gifts that acknowledged their emerging interests, rather than reflecting what she thought they should want. The children have been showing me their artwork and science. Discoveries all week, I told her, offering the validation she clearly needed. You've raised curious, creative children, Victoria. The tension in her shoulders eased slightly at the compliment. They've been happy here? She asked, her voice betraying her insecurity. They've adjusted well. See for yourself, I suggested, gesturing to where Emma was already showing James her sketchbook, while Oliver talked excitedly about the tadpoles we'd discovered in the creek. The day unfolded more naturally than any of us might have expected. We picnicked in the backyard, the children eager to show their parents every discovery of the past week, the vegetable garden where they'd planted their own radishes, the bird, nests under the eaves, the half-finished tree identification project they'd started with leaves collected on our walks. James participated enthusiastically, genuinely interested in their experiences. Victoria made a visible effort, though I noticed moments when bewilderment crossed her face, particularly when Oliver proudly displayed hands dirty from helping transplant seedlings, or when Emma described our visit to the working farm where we'd purchased fresh eggs. They're getting such exposure here, Victoria commented during a quiet moment while the children played with James. Her tone made the word sound like both a compliment and a concern. Different experiences than they're used to, I acknowledged. But valuable ones, I think. She nodded slowly. I see that now. I just worry about them falling behind their peers academically. Hillcrest has such rigorous standards. They read every day, I assured her. Emma's working on a journal of botanical illustrations, which combines art, science, and writing. Oliver has been measuring and recording the growth of his radishes, learning about data collection and life cycles. Learning doesn't have to look like worksheets and flashcards. Victoria sighed, twisting her wedding ring, one of the few pieces of jewelry she still wore. I know. I'm trying to recalibrate my thinking. It's just that every advantage seemed so important before. The right schools, the right activities, the right social circles. I was so sure I knew what they needed. Parenthood is a constant process of discovering that our children need different things than we imagined, I offered. Even good parents with the best intentions have to adjust course sometimes. Were you and Frank good parents? She asked suddenly, the question startling in its directness. James never talks much about his childhood, except in these vague, nostalgic terms. But you must have done something right. He's a good man, despite everything. We tried our best, I said simply. We made plenty of mistakes. We worried about money more than we should have, probably worked too many hours at the store during his early years. But we loved him unconditionally and tried to teach him values that would serve him well in any circumstances. Values like establishing secret, trust funds for grandchildren you weren't allowed to see? Her tone held no accusation, just genuine curiosity. Values like putting family before pride, I clarified. Frank always said that you can be right, or you can be happy, but sometimes you can't be both. I chose to help secretly rather than make an issue of my exclusion from their lives. Victoria looked at her children, playing with James in the yard that had once been his childhood playground. I think that might be the hardest lesson I'm learning through all this. That happiness isn't found in the things I thought were important. The social connections I cultivated, the lifestyle I was so determined to maintain, the appearances I obsessed over. None of it mattered when things fell apart. And what did matter? I asked gently. Family, she said simply. The people who stand by you when there's nothing to gain from it. My parents have been devastated by their own losses, too overwhelmed to help us. Our so-called friends disappeared overnight. Even my sister stopped returning calls once word got out about the foreclosure. She looked at me directly. But you, the woman I deliberately kept at arm's length for years, you stepped in without hesitation. Because that's what family does, I said. It's what Frank and I taught James. And it's what I hope Emma and Oliver will learn through all this, that true wealth is measured in relationships, not bank accounts. Victoria wiped away an unexpected tear. I've been so wrong about so many things, Ruth. I don't even know where to begin making amends. Begin by being present, I suggested. These moments with your children, that's where healing starts. Not in grand gestures or apologies, but in showing up consistently, in building memories that don't depend on spending money or impressing others. The weekend visit established a pattern that would continue throughout the summer. James and Victoria came every other weekend, sometimes staying overnight in my guest room, sometimes just for the day. Each visit revealed more evolution in their perspectives, more acceptance of their changed circumstances, more authentic connection with their children. By the third visit, Victoria had begun bringing her sketchbook, joining Emma under the oak tree to draw together. James helped Oliver build a small wooden toolbox using Frank's old tools and scraps from the garage. They contributed to meals, helped with household projects, and gradually became true participants in the life we were, building rather than anxious observers of their children's adaptation. Between visits, the children settled deeper into Cedar Falls routines. Emma joined the summer art program at the community center, where her natural talent flourished under the guidance of Mrs. Abernathy, a retired art teacher who recognized her potential immediately. She has a remarkable eye for detail, Mrs. Abernathy told me after the third session. Most children her age draw what they think they see. Emma draws what's actually there. Oliver became a regular at Mr. Chen's hardware store, no relation to our neighbor despite sharing a surname, where he was allowed to sort nuts and bolts in exchange for lessons about tools and materials. Mr. Chen, who had remembered James, as a boy, treated Oliver with the perfect balance of patience and expectation, gradually entrusting him with small repair projects to complete under supervision. That boy's got the Mitchell hands, he told me one afternoon when I came to collect. Oliver. Same careful way of holding tools, same attention to detail. Your husband would be proud. The public library became our second home. Mrs. Ellis enrolled both children in the summer reading program, where they competed to see who could finish more books before school started. Emma discovered a series about young artists throughout history, while Oliver devoured everything he could find about engineering, electronics, and natural science. They read more advanced material than most children their age, Mrs. Ellis observed. You can tell they've had educational advantages. Their parents prioritized learning, I acknowledged. That's one value I hope they'll maintain despite their changed circumstances. As July turned to August, the question of schooling became unavoidable. The children were registered at the local elementary school for fall, but James and Victoria still held out hope of bringing them back to New York once their situation stabilized. The ongoing financial investigation into the development scheme that had cost them their savings offered glimmers of possible recovery, though nothing certain. The prosecutor says they've traced some of the assets to offshore accounts, James Tadiosa explained during a Sunday afternoon visit in late August. There might be partial recovery for the investors, but the timeline is unclear. And your job search? I asked. I have a second interview next week with a smaller firm. The salary would be about a third of what I was making, but the work seems meaningful. Sustainable energy initiatives for urban communities. Victoria, who had been listening quietly, added, I got the position at the medical office. It's just administrative work, but they offer benefits, including health insurance. We could make it work financially, I think, especially if we stay in the Queen's apartment. But would you be ready to take the children back? I asked, voicing the question that concerned us all. Their stability is the priority right now. Victoria and James exchanged glances, having clearly discussed this privately. We think, Victoria began, then hesitated. We think they should stay here through the fall semester at least. They've adjusted so well, made friends, connected with the community. Uprooting them again with our situation still uncertain seems selfish. The decision, though painful for them, showed remarkable growth. The parents who had once prioritized status and appearances were now putting their children's emotional well-being above their own desire to maintain traditional family structures. Victoria, especially, had come a long way from the woman who had deemed Cedar Falls too provincial for her children even to visit. "We'll continue the weekend visits," James added, "and perhaps they could come to us during school breaks. But Ruth, we'd need your help for longer than we initially thought. Are you willing?" "Of course," I said without hesitation. "This home is theirs for as long as they need it. But I have one condition." They looked at me expectantly, clearly, prepared for reasonable boundaries or requests for financial contribution. "No more secrets," I said firmly. "The trust fund, the visits, the financial circumstances, the children deserve age-appropriate honesty about all of it. Secrets only create confusion and insecurity." James nodded immediately, but Victoria hesitated. "Even about the Franklin trust? About you funding their education when I kept them from you?" "Especially about that," I insisted. "They need to understand that family support comes without conditions, that love persists even through rejection. That's a lesson worth learning, don't you think?" Later that evening, after the children were bathed and in pajamas, we gathered in the living room for what James called a family meeting. Emma, perceptive as always, immediately sensed the seriousness of the occasion. "Are we in trouble?" she asked, looking from her parents to me and back again. "Not at all," James assured her. "But we want to talk to you about some important things, about our family, about money, and about plans for the future." Over the next hour, with remarkable gentleness and clarity, James and Victoria explained the basics of their financial situation in terms the children could understand. They talked about mistakes made with investments, about the loss of their home, about their new jobs and smaller apartment. They answered questions honestly but optimistically, emphasizing that while circumstances had changed, their love and commitment remained constant. Then Victoria surprised me by broaching the subject I had expected them to avoid. "There's something else you should know," she said, her voice steady despite the emotion I could see in her eyes. "Something important about Grandma Ruth." The children looked at me curiously. "When things got difficult financially," Victoria continued, "we were worried about keeping you at Hillcrest. It's a very expensive school, and we couldn't afford the tuition anymore. But then something surprising happened. We learned about a special fund that had been set up to pay for your education. Do you know who created that fund?" Oliver shook his head, while Emma's brow furrowed in concentration. "Grandma Ruth," Victoria said simply. "She used money from selling the hardware store to make sure you could stay at your school, even when we couldn't afford it ourselves." "But we didn't even visit Grandma Ruth," Oliver said, his young mind immediately grasping the contradiction. "Why would she pay for our school?" Victoria's composure faltered slightly, and James stepped in. "Because Grandma Ruth loves you very much, even when we made it difficult for her to show that love. She knew your education was important, so she found a way to help without making anyone feel uncomfortable about it." "That's what real family does," Victoria added, finding her voice again. "They help without expecting anything in return, even when they've been—" She paused, clearly searching for an appropriate word. "Excluded." Emma, ever direct, asked the question Victoria had been dreading. "Did you not like Grandma Ruth, Mom? Is that why we never visited?" Victoria took a deep breath. "I made a mistake, Emma. I thought that where someone lives or what they do for work made them more or less important. I thought Grandma Ruth's life here in Cedar Falls wasn't sophisticated enough for our family. I was very, very wrong about that." "But we like it here," Oliver protested. There's the library and Mr. Chen's store and tadpoles in the creek." "I know," Victoria said with a small smile. "That's part of what I was wrong about. There are many ways to live a good life, and Grandma Ruth's way, with community and creativity and connection to nature, is just as valuable as the way we lived in Westchester. Maybe even more valuable in some ways." James wrapped an arm around Victoria's shoulders, supporting her through this difficult confession. "We're all learning from our mistakes," he told the children. "That's what growing up is about, for adults too, not just kids." Emma, processing all this information with remarkable maturity, turned to me. "So you bought us school even though Mom didn't want us to see you?" "I wanted to help in whatever way I could," I explained. "Even if that meant helping from a distance." "Like a guardian angel," Oliver suggested, always ready with imaginative interpretations. "Something like that," I agreed. Emma got up from her spot on the floor and came to sit beside me on the sofa, leaning against my side in a gesture of affection that had become more frequent in recent weeks. "I'm glad we get to stay with you now," she said quietly. "Even if it's because of sad money things." "Sometimes," I told her, putting my arm around her shoulders, "difficult circumstances lead us exactly where we need to be." As fall approached and school began, Cedar Falls embraced Emma and Oliver as if they had always been part of the community. Teachers recognized their academic strengths and provided appropriate challenges. Friends invited them to birthday parties and weekend playdates. The initial novelty of their presence, the grandchildren Ruth Mitchell had spoken of for years but who had never visited, gave way to simple acceptance. For Victoria and James, each weekend visit revealed more progress in rebuilding their lives. James accepted the position with the sustainable energy firm, finding unexpected satisfaction in work that aligned with values he had developed, watching his father serve the Cedar Falls community through the hardware store. Victoria discovered talent as an office manager, her organizational skills and attention to detail earning quick recognition from her employers. "It's strange," she reflected during an October visit as we watched the children collecting colorful leaves in the yard. "A year ago, I would have considered this work beneath me. Now I find myself proud of managing the office efficiently, of solving problems, of actually contributing something useful." "Work with purpose always brings satisfaction," I observed. That's something Frank understood deeply. The hardware store wasn't just a business to him. It was a way to help people build and maintain their homes, to teach skills, to be part of something larger than himself. "James talks about him more now," Victoria said. "Tells stories about the store, about growing up here. I think he's reconnecting with parts of himself he tried to bury when we were caught up in the Westchester lifestyle." The Franklin Educational Trust continued its work, though now with transparency rather than secrecy. After careful discussion, we decided to maintain the children's enrollment at Hillcrest through the academic year, allowing them to return for the spring semester if James and Victoria's situation stabilized sufficiently. The trust would cover their tuition, with the understanding that this support came with no strings attached other than the expectation that they would someday help others as they had been helped. Education was always important to Frank, I explained when James expressed concern about accepting such significant financial support. He would consider this the perfect use of the money from the store, investing in his grandchildren's futures. By Thanksgiving, a tentative plan had emerged for the family's future. James and Victoria had saved enough for a modest down payment on a small house in a nearby suburb of New York. Not Westchester, but a community with good public schools and reasonable commuting distance to their jobs. The children would finish the school year in Cedar Falls, then rejoin their parents for a fresh start in their new home. "It won't be what they were used to," Victoria acknowledged during the holiday visit, helping me prepare cranberry sauce from berries the children had helped harvest at a local bog. No private school, no summer houses, no lavish birthday parties. But I think they'll be okay with that. "They've learned what truly matters," I agreed. "Community, creativity, purpose, those values will serve them well wherever they go. The Thanksgiving gathering itself became a testament to the family's transformation. James and Victoria arrived with homemade contributions to the meal: a vegetable casserole from Victoria, bread James had learned to bake in their small apartment kitchen. The children proudly showed off the table decorations they had created: pine cone turkeys and pressed leaf placemats. We invited Mrs. Patterson and the Chens to join us, creating an extended family of choice around my dining room table. As we prepared to sit down for the meal, James asked if he could say something. Standing at the head of the table where his father had once presided, he looked around at all of us with emotion evident in his expression. "A year ago," he began, "I thought I knew what success looked like. It was measured in square footage, investment portfolios, private school acceptances, and social connections. I thought I was giving my children advantages by surrounding them with luxury and prestige." He reached for Victoria's hand before continuing. "When we lost everything, or what we thought was everything, it felt like failure. Ultimate, devastating. Failure. What we couldn't see then was that we were being offered a reset, a chance to rediscover what actually matters." He looked at Emma and Oliver, seated on either side of me. "You two have adapted to changes that would challenge most adults. You've discovered strengths and interests you might never have found in your old environment. You've learned that happiness doesn't depend on possessions, but on connections. To people, to nature, to community, to your own creativity." His gaze shifted to Victoria. "My wife has shown remarkable courage and resilience, embracing a new way of life with grace and an open mind. She's discovered capabilities she never knew she had because she never needed to use them." Finally, he looked at me. "And my mother, who had every reason to reject us after how we treated her, instead showed us the true meaning of family. Not just by financial support, though that saved us in practical ways, but by loving us unconditionally, by welcoming us back without judgment, by teaching all of us what wealth really means." He raised his glass of sparkling cider, another concession to changed circumstances, replacing the expensive wines that would have flowed at previous holiday celebrations. "To family," he said simply, "the real source of wealth in any circumstance." As winter settled over Cedar Falls, Emma and Oliver continued to flourish. Emma's art teacher entered her work in a regional competition, where she won recognition for a watercolor of the oak tree in our backyard, its branches bare against a winter sky. Oliver joined a science club at school, working with other budding engineers to build a wind-powered generator for the school's spring science fair. James and Victoria closed on their modest new house in January, spending weekends painting and making simple repairs to prepare it for the family's eventual reunion. They included the children in decisions about paint colors and room arrangements, creating excitement about the transition while honoring the attachment Emma and Oliver had formed to their temporary home with me. "We want to incorporate elements of both worlds," James explained. "The community values and creativity they've discovered here, combined with the educational opportunities and diversity of the New York area." One snowy weekend in February, Victoria asked if she could speak with me privately. We sat in the sunroom, watching fat flakes drift past the windows while the children played a board game with James in the living room. "I've been thinking about the trust fund," she began, "about what it represented beyond the financial support." I waited, sensing she had more to say. It was an act of faith, wasn't it? Faith that someday the barriers would come down, that love would win out over pride and prejudice. Faith in the inherent connection between grandparents and grandchildren, despite the obstacles I put in place. I believed that love finds a way, I acknowledged, even when circumstances make it difficult. Victoria nodded, looking out at the snow-covered garden where spring flowers lay dormant beneath the frozen ground, waiting for their season to return. "I want to establish something similar," she said. "Not with money. We don't have much to spare now, but with time and commitment." "What did you have in mind?" I asked. I've been volunteering at a women's shelter near our new house, she explained. So many of the mothers there are struggling to provide stability for their children while rebuilding their lives. I was thinking about creating a program, maybe calling it the Franklin Project in honor of your husband, to connect these children with older mentors, people who could provide continuity and support while their mothers get back on their feet. The proposal touched me deeply, not just for its inherent merit, but for what it represented in Victoria's evolution. The woman who had once defined worth by wealth and status now recognized the value of intergenerational connection, of community, support, of continuity in difficult times. I think Frank would be honored, I told her. He always believed in practical help rather than abstract charity, in teaching skills, providing tools, creating sustainable support. I thought perhaps, Victoria continued hesitantly, you might help me design it. You have experience with children, with community organizations, and you've demonstrated rather conclusively how powerful the right kind of support can be during family disruptions. The invitation represented a complete reversal of our former relationship. Victoria not just accepting my role in the family, but actively seeking my guidance and partnership in work she considered important. I'd be delighted, I told her sincerely. As winter gave way to spring, preparations for the children's transition back to their parents accelerated. Emma and Oliver would finish the school year in Cedar Falls, then spend the summer helping to establish the family in their new home before. Starting at the local public school in September, weekend visits continued, but now with a different purpose. Less about maintaining connection during separation, and more about building bridges between their Cedar Falls experiences and their future life. During their last weekend visit, before the move, James helped Oliver plant a small vegetable garden behind their new house, using skills learned in my backyard. Victoria and Emma established a corner of Emma's new bedroom as an art studio, complete with proper lighting and storage for supplies, an acknowledgement of the passion she had discovered during her time in Cedar Falls. The school year ended, with celebrations and tearful goodbyes. Emma's art teacher presented her with a professional sketchbook and quality pencils to continue your development. Oliver's science club threw a farewell party featuring homemade ice cream created with a hand-cranked maker he had helped design. Neighbors stopped by with parting gifts and promises to stay in touch, treating the children's departure not as an ending, but as an expansion of the Cedar Falls community to include their new home. The final evening before the move, the children, and I sat on the porch swing watching fireflies emerge in the gathering dusk, a scene that had become one of our favorite rituals. Emma leaned against my shoulder while Oliver counted the flashing insects, keeping a meticulous tally in the small notebook he carried everywhere. "Will you be lonely when we're gone, Grandma Ruth?" Emma asked, the directness that characterized her personality undiminished by the emotions of the moment. "I'll miss you both terribly," I admitted, "but I won't be lonely. You've helped me reconnect with the community in ways I hadn't since Grandpa Frank died. And I'll visit often, just as you'll come back to Cedar Falls for holidays and parts of summer. Plus," Oliver added practically, "you're helping Mom with the Franklin Project, so you'll be busy." "That's true," I agreed. The mentoring program Victoria had envisioned was taking shape, with plans to launch in the fall. My role as advisor had evolved into active partnership, drawing on connections in both Cedar Falls and the New York area to create a network of support for children in transition. "I'm glad we had to stay with you," Emma said after a moment of contemplation. "Even though it was because of sad things with money and Dad's job, I learned a lot." "Like how to grow vegetables," Oliver chimed in, "and fix stuff with tools, and catch fireflies. And more important things too," Emma added with wisdom beyond her years. "Like how being rich doesn't mean having lots of things. It means having people who help you even when you haven't been nice to them." Out of the mouths of babes, as the saying goes. In her simple statement, Emma had captured the essence of everything that had transpired since that desperate phone call from James many months before. The family that had fractured over status and appearances had been remade through loss and humility, ultimately discovering that true wealth had been available all along, just not in the form they had been taught to value. The next morning, as we loaded the last of the children's belongings into James and Victoria's car, the symbolism of the moment wasn't lost on any of us. The designer luggage that had arrived on my doorstep was now supplemented with cardboard boxes containing treasures acquired during their Cedar Falls sojourn, a collection of bird nests and interesting rocks for Oliver, sketchbooks filled with Emma's artistic progress, books borrowed then gifted from the library, photographs of friends and community events. Victoria hugged me tightly before getting into the car. "I don't have words," she said simply. "You don't need them," I assured her. "Just take good care of those children and remember that you're always welcome here." James embraced me next. "Thank you, Mom, for everything. For teaching us what Dad always knew, that true success isn't measured in dollars, but in decency and community." As the car pulled away, Emma and Oliver waving from the back windows until they were out of sight, I stood on the porch that had witnessed generations of comings and goings. Frank had proposed to me on these very steps. James had taken his first, independent steps across these floorboards. Now his children had found healing and growth in this same modest home that Victoria had once deemed unsuitable for even brief visits. In the garden, the perennials Frank had planted decades ago were pushing through the soil, ready for another season of bloom. In the workshop, his tools hung ready for the next project, the next generation of Mitchell hands. In the kitchen, recipes, handed down through generations, waited in my grandmother's faded handwriting, now supplemented by new traditions begun during the children's stay. The trust fund that had once represented my only connection to my grandchildren had served its purpose, not just in providing educational stability during crisis, but in creating an opening for authentic relationship when all other paths seemed closed. The money itself was secondary to what it represented, a belief that love persists despite rejection, that family bonds transcend temporary barriers, that genuine wealth resides in connections that cannot be foreclosed upon or devalued by market fluctuations. As I turned to go back inside, Mrs. Patterson called from her garden next door. "They'll be back before you know it, Ruth. Those children found something special here." "Yes," I agreed. And so did we all. The empty house welcomed me with familiar creaks and settlings, no longer feeling hollow with the children's departure, but rather expansive with the possibility of their return and of new chapters yet to be written. The grandchildren who had been kept from me were now inextricably part of my life, just as Cedar Falls had become part of them. The rigid boundaries that had once defined our family had dissolved, replaced by permeable connections that would allow relationships to flow naturally across distance and circumstance. On the refrigerator, held by a magnet from the Cedar Falls Founders' Day celebration, was a drawing Emma had left for me. A portrait of our family under the oak tree, all 4 generations represented from Frank, drawn from photographs, to Emma, and Oliver themselves. Across the bottom in her careful handwriting, she had written a single word, rich. Indeed we were, though not in the way Victoria had once defined the term. Rich in memory and possibility. Rich in restored relationships and new understandings. Rich in the knowledge that sometimes rejection leads to revelation, and that love, patient and persistent, eventually finds its way home. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.